for another Good Takes podcast. Excited to dive into officially the last book of the trilogy, Return of the King.
Near in the end. The journey's coming to a close, kind of.
Well, exactly. I mean, bittersweet, but as we were just, we've been talking as we've been through reading Return of the King, how we want to break this out, and knowing that they've gotten a little lengthy because we've got so much to talk about here, to kind of keep this one in similar line of, an hour or so. We have decided we're just going to focus on the first 5 chapters of Return of the King. So this is all book 5, which again is what is following Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, Gandalf, Merry, and Pippin, all of the other people. Essentially, we're tabling Sam and Frodo for now, and we'll get back to them. But again, just because book 5 is so huge, we're just going to go halfway. So we'll take us all the way up to the Battle of Pelennor Fields. We'll stop there and then pick that up again with our next good take.
Yeah, because essentially the Return of the King is just back to back to back climaxes of the plot. I mean, and if you consider Cirith Ungol also like a climax, it's action packed. This second half of the narrative is busy.
Yeah, well, we've been leading up to this in the first 2 books as well, so we are finally here. Yeah, it's really exciting. So we have been, using the book as our guide because that's what we've been reading and kind of looking at most recently. Obviously, we've seen the movies hundreds of times, so that's always an easy reference for us. But yeah, let's just dive in, starting where the book took place. And then just a very quick recap, because from a movie perspective, so if you've only ever watched the movies, we've mentioned this before, but there are certain elements of the 3rd movie that actually take place in Two Towers, the book. So the entire dialogue with Saruman at Orthanc, that all happens actually in Two Towers. So we've already covered that. And then, of course, when we do eventually pick up again with Sam and Frodo, we've already, thank God, covered Shelob and majority of Cirith Ungol. So we'll stick with the books in terms of kind of guiding us through. But yeah, so I mean, where we are at in the books, the conversation with Saruman has already happened. Pippin has royally messed up, as he is wont to do.
Yeah.
And the book opens with Pippin and Gandalf riding to Minas Tirith. Yeah. So what did you think of the opening? I mean, there was a couple immediate differences I noticed right off the bat from the movie. But, it's an interesting spot. Certainly the transportation of Pippin to Minas Tirith is accurate in the books, and Gandalf leading the way. But one thing I thought was really interesting is as they're riding in the books, they notice that sorry, Grim is going nuts in the background. So my dog is probably going to be making an appearance here with a lot of scratchy noises in his crate. But anyway, no, so they notice actually as Pippin and Gandalf are riding to Minas Tirith that the beacons are already lit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't get that. You don't get the epic music either as it's lit across the White Mountains. And also when Gandalf comments on it, he says that war is kindled, not hope. Quite a difference.
Yeah, that's so true.
No, and that's one of the greatest scenes in the film. I mean, I feel like I say that about every scene that we bring up, but yeah, I think it's really done well in the films, and I don't know, I don't really see. I guess they're unsure of where Rohan is at this point in time because the riders sent from Gondor have not reached Theoden, but it doesn't seem like they did much, like already Theoden is decided that he's going to essentially march to Gondor, but it's good that they're there.
Well, and I guess the beacons in theory are also supposed to pull in other groups of people, right? It's just that in the movies, it's so obvious that Gondor and Rohan are the 2 main kind of populaces that's the focal point.
Interesting, because I wonder if they run south as well. Like, I don't know the names of all of the mountains off by heart. Like, he's got so many names for the peaks.
Yeah.
Because I wonder if that's also how they rally the south of Gondor, which gets much more of a focus in the books. Like the movies, they're not even touched, and we'll get into that later. But so you're right. The beacons must summon simply more than our lovely boy.
Yeah, that's right. But it is kind of a shame because, well, not necessarily a shame, but certainly a big difference because in the movies, Gandalf actually has to get Pippin to light the beacons because Denethor is like, I'm absolutely not calling for aid, and he's kind of denying it all. So you miss a big moment for Pippin, and he's got so many idiotic moments. It's nice to see the boy win one. So kind of sad he doesn't get that chance in the books because they're already lit.
But we find out that once more Pippin's foolishness. I know I don't remember actually if this is at the end of the Two Towers or in this chapter. But Gandalf says that he was going to try to use the stone, and had Pippin not
himself.
done it, then he would have exposed himself to Sauron.
That's right. And that is in Two Towers, because we did briefly
Okay.
talk about it.
Yeah, okay.
But it does come up once again that Pippin did a good thing by looking into the stone. And they do mention that again at the beginning of Return of the King. So I guess he has that one win. But I mean, it's a really interesting contrast, because in the movies, when Pippin and Gandalf arrive at Minas Tirith, it's obviously to a distraught Denethor. He's found out that, you know, his boy Boromir is no longer. But he seems to have no hope. However, in these books, they meet an entirely different Denethor. And we've talked a lot about characters that are really much the same, but also those ones that are super different. And wow, Denethor, similarly to Theoden, and how Theoden is a lot more kingly and powerful to me in the books, I got the same feeling from Denethor for sure.
Agreed. Yeah, you both like him more and hate him more in some respect.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But there's kind of a quote there that while Theoden is a kindly old man in the books, Denethor is a proud, subtle man of far greater lineage and power. And though he's not called a king, you know, he does kind of have this kingly and powerful aura about him. So yeah, he certainly does feel a lot more powerful and a lot more prepared to go to war. I mean, there's one scene and it's a little further down, so we can kind of start at the beginning again. Oh, someone's in trouble. The boy's getting wrangled.
Give him a bull penis.
I regret telling you what bully sticks are, but they keep him quiet, so I'm just gonna let it happen. Well, we're back. Had a little moment with my new puppy.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah, let's call it that. So I'm ensconced in darkness right now because my puppy's sleeping. So hopefully he allows us to get through this. But yeah, let's just pick up where we were just talking. We were really just talking about some of the differences in some of these characters. And Denethor is a character that's newly introduced in Return of the King in both books and movies. And we were saying he just has a lot more power in the books. Like he does seem more kingly and certainly more prepared for war.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like it comes later on in before Pelennor, but he reveals himself under his cloak to always be wearing mail. I think he says like for years he's been doing it and sleeping in it, which is hilarious. I had to laugh at that. Just because it's like, why are you sleeping in your mail, bro?
Yeah, we see you. All right, we get it, guy. You're ready.
Yeah.
But yeah, it furthers the point that he is ready for war. He's not in this defensive, kind of refusing to believe or admit it attitude that you certainly see in the movies. So it is really interesting to see that. And even
There's a lot of
before,
differences.
totally, certainly in that character. So before they actually meet Denethor, again, so Gandalf and Pippin are riding into Minas Tirith, and one thing I noticed right off the bat is as we know, Tolkien describes things to the absolute T, so you really do get to visualize it in your mind. And my God, the movies did such a fabulous job of replicating Minas Tirith. It's exactly how I picture it when
really
it's described in the book.
No, totally. Like down to not only just like the rings of the city, obviously, but just like how the mountain like spikes itself down, and the description of the walls. Like it's a crazy representation. It's in my mind's eye, it's not totally the same, but it's pretty close. Obviously, the movies have influenced it, but really, like you said, always well done with Peter Jackson and the Weta Workshop or whatever, because yeah. And when in the book, when it's describing Gandalf and Pippin making their ride up, which they show in the films, or at least the extended, I had in my mind the music playing, like the Gondor music playing as they're like running up, and the description is beautiful. When they mention like the tower, it's like how it's just like a spike of pearl or something. It's you really picture this like like Atlantis, some like history or some city like pulled right out of like mythical history.
Yeah, and so grandiose, like so much beauty. And they do mention it's kind of decaying, and maybe you're not seeing it in its glory, but certainly has that shadow of the glory that it was created in. So yeah, it's really cool. And you're totally right. The movies have obviously kind of manipulated or distorted our view. So it's natural that we're going to picture things similar to it. But there have been many cases. Gollum is one good example where what our mind's eye has come to see is so different from what we are actually seeing in the movies. And so for me, Minas Tirith was a really well done replica.
No, agreed. So I mean, the movies just don't really show, I guess, like the outer walls, which is fair enough, but that comes into play later with the Rohirrim. But yeah, it's the beginning of the book, the chapters are quite lengthy, but they really pack a lot in. It never really drags on, like I felt at least the start of book 4 did. I thought I was afraid that the same thing was going to happen when, you know, you get the whole description of Minas Tirith. But when you're introduced to like characters like Baragond, and every scene with Denethor and Gandalf is just, it's amazing to read. The dialogue is top tier.
It was interesting to me also that in the books, it's I guess it's a little bit of Pippin's perspective because he is the one who's meeting Denethor for the first time. So you're kind of getting his sense of who Denethor is and how he carries himself. But there's this comparison to him and Gandalf often that Denethor at one point there's a quote, Denethor looked indeed much more like a great wizard than Gandalf did, more kingly, beautiful, and powerful and older. Yet, by a sense other than sight, Pippin perceived that Gandalf had the greater power and the deeper wisdom and a majesty that was veiled. But there's this clear battle of wills happening between the two of them, and that moment in that conversation that Pippin is just kind of like watching a tennis match.
Exactly.
It's really cool to see that and hear
it. You get a few moments of him describing like Pippin noticing like literal like daggers, like as they stare into each other's eyes. Like there's the surface level debate and dialogue, and then there's like almost like something else going on between them as they vie for maybe dominance over the city, or you know, their wills are just going back and forth. But that initial conversation when Pippin gives his service, it's a little more well done, go figure, in the books. And it seems less like a screw up. Like when Pippin does it in the films, you're like, okay, like fair enough. It comes from a good place. But in the books, it's like a thing of, it seems more of a reverent act. I don't know.
More honorable in a weird way.
Yeah. And like Pippin, I was surprised that Gandalf didn't chastise him for it. Yeah, it is a really interesting moment, the introduction of Denethor, when Pippin is more or less commanded to give a tale of the company and, you know, his history. An interesting part that I thought was relevant was he's speaking about the stone, like the Orthanc stone, and Denethor like looks at Pippin, like he gives him just like a quick little look, and I think that's your first introduction into the idea that Denethor, you know, he might have the far sight of the Númenóreans and you know, but there's something else. And then you have to wonder, did he see Pippin in the Palantir when Pippin was in it? Like how often is Denethor in the ball?
Right, because and so it has been a while since I've read this book. And I made a note, like as a question, does Denethor have a Palantir? And he does, right?
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, but again, like just jumping ahead a bit, there's before Faramir comes in, or it's right when Faramir comes back wounded. There's in the high tower, in the pinnacle of the tower, there's like you could see like a light go off, and then he comes back like a broken man, essentially, when his resolve is destroyed. Because I assume that he's seen a wrathful Sauron. Yeah, but you have to wonder what's going on, because I like you, it's also been a while, so I forget, and I don't know if the book goes into it further, because like you said at the start, we've only read the first 5 chapters so far, and I don't know how much he has seen of Sauron himself in the Palantir.
Yeah, I do think the reveal that he's been using it does become more on the nose, because when to your point, when he had that moment of looking at Pippin, when Pippin was explaining looking into the Palantir, it almost triggered a memory in me where I was like, oh right, Denethor's actually using one of these. So you know, as we get into this a little further in some of our next podcasts, we can talk about when that progression kind of happens and when that reveal is made better known. But it is interesting because Denethor does give off this air that he knows so much and he sees all and he knows more. And it did seem to me like, oh, is this some Númenórean descendant? You know, is this blood in him that's creating this ability? But no, it's just plain old, you know, use of epic items and, not
Yeah,
weapons,
exactly.
but
And it's
it's,
aged. I mean, it really heavily implies, at least, even at the beginning, that it's like he's aged beyond his years in a real
yes.
sense. Like I don't
Yeah.
picture him. He's described as an old man, but I don't picture like I picture Theoden older in my mind. Like I
Agreed. I
really
think
picture
that is the
Theoden like
implication.
like a geriatric. But I feel like in my mind's eye anyway that Denethor still has some youth to him. But
Yeah.
it's interesting like the effect once more of like you were saying, these powerful artifacts. And the dialogue, just to go back quickly between Gandalf and Denethor, Gandalf has an awesome line about they're speaking about the defense of the city and like what needs to be done and whatnot. And Gandalf is like, for I am like also a steward. And it's again, it's just more hints because I always want to try to bring myself out as a first time reader and trying to imagine like what Gandalf, like what's going on in the world, but also like what is Gandalf? Because
Right.
again, that's the first time I feel, maybe not the first time, but it's one of the few times that he like explicitly mentions some purpose of his, let's just say,
Right.
beyond being an old like wizard
No,
or
that is
whatever.
so true. And we've talked about this before. Gandalf is obviously more than just a wizard, just some master of witchcraft and wizardry. But he does allude to it only a few times. And I mean, him being able to literally resurrect is
Yeah, well,
obviously
yeah,
one
that I mean
major
that's a pretty
tell.
big tell. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But because I have to like, I just don't know what I would have. I can't parse like before my like before knowledge of the lore, not that it's comprehensive, and then after, you know what I mean? Like I don't
Mhm.
recall what I would have ever thought about Gandalf before I knew that he was a Maya or before I knew what that was, you know? Like
Yeah.
you're dealing with like his power and like his resurrection and especially now like you said in that quote there, like his veiled like he's veiling something, you know,
Hmm.
like there's some nature to him that is always hidden.
No, it's true. There's so much background once you're deep into the Lord of the Rings lore. It's one of, I mean, I say this about so many books, but truly for Lord of the Rings, I wish I could experience the entire story just completely fresh and just
Yeah.
erase my mind and start it again because there are so many nods like that where we know what's being said, but I'd love to know what my thought process would have been if I didn't have this kind of background knowledge. And Gandalf is such an enigmatic and layered dimensional character that there's just so much to it. And you get kind of these hints bit by bit throughout the book, and then you really get to hear more about it in the Silmarillion and even in the appendices a bit, I believe.
Mhm.
But it is cool to see these kind of little moments. But as you say, I mean, already spoiled for us and probably for anyone else watching, because if you've come this far, then you've got to be a
You
fan
must
of
know.
some degree. But no, it is really interesting. And it's funny because there are moments where, and this might not be in this initial dialogue, but later down the road, Denethor makes these kind of jab comments to Gandalf. And at one point, Pippin is like, he looks at Gandalf because he's worried his temper is going to get the best of him, but he
Yeah.
responds calmly. And it's
Yeah, and
not
often
that
like sorrowful.
right, because it's not that Denethor is a real match for Gandalf, but he does hold some animosity towards him and wants to be perceived as on the same level.
Mhm.
And to Gandalf, that is probably hilarious. But
Yeah,
there is this kind of battle of wills that happens that at least does show Denethor does have some strength to him, and to go to toe to toe with Gandalf is a tough thing to do.
it's impressive. Yeah, and he's always described, at least before you meet him, in the few times that he's spoken of, as being like a very, very wise man and a great
Hmm.
leader. And you do get like I was saying earlier, you both like he's not like in the movies, he's purely despicable. In the books, you kind of not only sympathize, but you do see a bit of that strength. Like
Yeah,
he's not a bad guy. Like he's not overly condescending to Pippin.
yeah, true.
He has his outbursts mainly at Gandalf and later Faramir, but no, you do get the sense that like this is actually like a good leader. Even though
I
like
agree.
in the movies it's less subtle that he's maybe more reluctant about giving up the stewardship, but in the books he's not aware. It doesn't seem anyway that he's aware of Aragorn like he is in
Yeah.
the films. Um,
No, that's right. And even if he is a little bit, not to the same degree, and certainly not overly threatened by him. His focus is on his
no,
city
yeah,
and his
he's
people.
not expecting Aragorn to just waltz in. Like there's no mention of him, and
Yeah.
yeah.
What is also interesting is we've talked before, I believe in our last, well, a couple back when Faramir was talking about hearing the Boromir's horn when Boromir was falling. Denethor says the same thing. So I was saying
Yeah.
that, oh, Faramir's so elvish, he's just perceiving this. I mean, I guess this horn is just that impressive because
It might be.
Denethor is hearing it also.
Yeah,
It's very
but I think
strange.
Denethor also very much has like the strength of Numenor in him. Like I think
Right.
Faramir by far the most in the out of the three.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think like you were saying last episode, I think it's probably maybe both or something, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
but who
maybe
knows?
they're
Like I
both.
said, I'm still confused honestly about distances sometimes.
I know. We need to get someone actually. We should definitely have a conversation with someone who's really dove into the like topography, logistics of
Mhm.
it. Like I'd love to know someone who truly understands maps and distances and like I'm looking up leagues every 30 seconds. Like I forget
Yeah, yeah,
I
same.
forgot this measurement.
Who uses
But
leagues? Come on.
I
Let's
mean,
see.
it was like 90 years ago. But
Yeah.
no, it is interesting. And there is a quote where Gandalf does say about Denethor, he's not as other men of his time. Whatever his descent from father to son, by some chance, the blood of Western East runs nearly true in him as it does in his other son, Faramir, and yet did not in Boromir, whom he loved
Mhm.
best. So there's
Yeah.
definitely more of a similarity between Faramir and Denethor, and maybe that does speak to them both hearing the horn.
Yeah, we love Boromir. I love if because he's actually always mentioned. He's mentioned far more than I remember in these later books. But
Yeah.
even in that introduction with Denethor, like I forget verbatim, but he's just going on about how great Boromir was and how he took back Osgiliath and routed the enemy, like drove them back across the river. You're
Yeah.
like, nice.
Oh,
Good guy.
absolutely love
Still missed.
Boromir. And one of those moments in the movies, I believe extended, when Faramir is having this flashback to when Boromir did defeat the enemy and drive them back. And Boromir has so many great lines, but the best one is break out the ale. These men are thirsty, and
Yeah,
everyone's
it's so great.
celebrating.
Every time we have a beer, that line is getting dropped at the good
Yeah.
house. Um,
Absolutely. And also that is when he in the movies is told by his father, there's this elvish weapon, you got to go find it, you have to go to Rivendell. And he has that final line to Faramir before he leaves, remember this day, little brother, for today is a good day. We've tossed that one around a little bit too. Very poignant with you as little brother, of course. I'm naturally Boromir in this
Yeah,
equation.
yeah, fair enough. I accept that. I accept that charge.
But
But
no,
yeah,
it's
so sorry, go ahead now.
Oh, one thing I was going to say is we finally got in Pippin's telling of the whole story of Boromir falling to Denethor. We finally got real timelines. Like we no longer have to chart the moons to understand where everyone is.
Yeah,
It's been 13 days since Amon. Like things have just rolled. It's been two
it is
weeks.
nuts. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, and again, like it's not a criticism by any means, but the sense of time is done well, like you said, with the description of the world and whatnot. But and forgive me because I forget if we actually mentioned this in the very when we were doing fellowship. But one thing, there's a great part of the preface of the novel, where Tolkien is just explaining many things. And there's one part that he agrees with. He says the one criticism he agrees with of his book is that it's too short.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Because there are moments when it does, it's not that it feels rushed, but it feels like there was more. You can sometimes tell that something wanted to be fleshed out more. And
Mm-hmm.
for the sake of brevity, it was not.
Yeah. No, that's true. Do you have any specific example, or are you just kind of thinking generally, given the fast-paced move of these past 2 weeks
Well,
in the
it's coming
books?
up, but for instance, I think like the wild men, like the Pukul men,
Oh
are
yeah,
like
we'll
more
get to that
worthy.
with Rohan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
not
really
that I think that
interesting.
there's like some great story to tell. And I think it's kind of nice actually to keep having these things that just like appear that you don't know. It gives mystery to the world. But
Yeah.
but more specifically in the time length where, like you said, for 13, it's only been 13 days.
Mm-hmm.
And or for instance, how last time we were speaking about how when Theoden is pulled from his stupor, they immediately ride to war.
Yeah.
And like I understand for sure there's pressing matters, and it's trying to I believe convey a sense of like we're
Urgency.
actually almost too late beyond hope and things need to happen now. But still, I don't know. I think that the story, I don't find that it's long in the tooth. It doesn't overstay its welcome, and the pace is actually faster than I remember it being.
And it's funny you say that because whenever I do, I was just at a party this weekend, for example, and naturally found the only other Lord of the Rings fan in the room. And he was like, I've never read the books. They're so long. And so obviously we got into
They're
this
not
20
even.
minute
They're not.
conversation. No, but that is the first defense, I guess, or response you get from people who haven't read the books. They always say, oh, they're just so long.
But I don't even understand, because I've heard that before, and I've thought that, especially when I was younger, trying to read them in like
Yeah.
elementary or junior high school. But looking at them now, it's like they're not only are they not like, as when it's like one volume, fine, but they're really not long. Like I feel like in like almost like an objective sense, the Harry Potter books, like the Order of the Phoenix, I believe, because I was looking at this a couple days ago, I believe the Order of the Phoenix has more words than the Lord of the Rings.
All 3 books.
Yeah.
No.
I'll
We can
confirm
look
that,
at
or someone can look that up. But like, because the Order of the Phoenix is a tome. When
I'd
you
say it's like
hold a
500
one
pages.
thing copy of the Lord of the Rings, it's thick, but it's like it's not as long as like Crime and Punishment.
Right.
You know, like it's there are many books.
No, it's true.
It's not long. It's not long. It's just
certainly
too
not the
short.
longest book out there. And it's a trilogy. I mean, I'm sure that the Song of Fire and Ice, or Ice and Fire, I always get that wrong, is much longer. It just seems to be kind of the default response. But no, I mean, they certainly, Tolkien does say that, or it's mentioned in the preface, that the book is too short, and that being the major complaint. And to your point, yeah, I agree. And you've brought up some good examples of where the brevity is kind of felt like Tolkien must have felt like it was needed. But they certainly could have gone on a little bit more.
No, it doesn't hinder
it
the story. I'm not like, it's the best criticism you could give it, because if that's all there is to say, and maybe other people, I'm sure many people disagree, and I'm sure for many people that don't read often, because it's it's just not as common as it was. Sure, maybe it looks daunting, but once you get past Fellowship, it moves. It rolls.
Yeah, no, it really does.
But yeah, so I guess we can move on from Denethor. I mean, do you have anything left to say about at least that initial conversation? It was so rich, but I can't think of. There's not too many differences in the subject matter of the conversation.
No, it's really interesting when we go back to Denethor in a few chapters, when he is hearing Faramir's retelling of how he ran into the halfling, the wizard's pupil, Faramir. So we can park that for a minute, because next chapter actually goes back to Rohan. So this is where Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and Merry still are. And there's a lot of differences here, actually, major ones, where I feel like the movies kept a lot of Minas Tirith, and that initial introduction to Denethor, even though the character is so different, a lot of the plot points remain the same. Beacons aside, but such a minor element. This veers heavily. So when you're back in with the Rohirrim, a lot of huge differences. The biggest one being, I knew that, well, obviously Aragorn already has Anduril. So he already has his sword, the reforged Narsil blade. And of course, in the movies, when the Rohirrim are kind of camping out and ready to prepare for war, Elrond actually shows up to not only give him Anduril, but to also explain that Arwen's life is tied to the ring. I love the inclusion of Arwen. I love her, and I love Aragorn and Arwen's little romance, because they don't overdo it. It's not overly cheesy.
No, it's not. It's
I'd be in
Arwen's
shoes.
As far as like forced movie romances go, like obviously it's based in reality, such as it is. It's not. Yeah, I agree. It's a totally fine addition.
Right, but her life being tied to the ring, I'm just kind of like, I guess the idea here is that she has forsaken her immortality to be with Aragorn, and so therefore, should everyone fail, she will fall like everyone else. But they kind of hint out or make it seem like it's a literal connection, and I never fully got that.
The wording of it is quite poor. I think you're right with your interpretation, or at the least, it's just like the doom of all elves, where like we are all leaving, and if she stays, like she'll just wither into. I mean, but this is gonna happen anyways after everyone dies. Like she'll just wither into nothing, essentially.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. The movies, I think I understand why they said it that way, because it's easier than like giving a lore dump that would probably just go over people's heads, just because you're not given that context. Like in the movies, actually never do a good job at explaining why the elves are leaving. You never. I feel like it's never properly explained. It's not just like they're, like they can't stand Sauron anymore or something. You don't even know what the West is. I mean, you don't really in the books either, to be fair.
Right.
But yeah.
Well, and there's always that the time of the elves is over is a line that's used in the
Yeah, it's
movies
like what
often.
the
And it's just like,
I
why?
mean,
But why? But even honestly, and maybe I'm going to show some ignorance here, but I'm trying to recall exactly why. So per the books, it's because it was the magic of the rings, specifically the three elven rings, that allowed them to have their power in Middle Earth, right? To some
essentially,
degree.
so someone is going to absolutely come in here and decimate us and just teach us a real lesson.
Someone
My
educate us.
understanding is that the rings just prolonged an inevitability. So the rings maintain the grandeur and the splendor of the elves in the first age, where
Right.
time they just get world weary, and they were not made to be, even though they can't leave the confines of creation, essentially. Um, like the hardships of the world and the passage of time in Middle Earth affects their timelessness, and they become world weary and they begin to wither away. So the rings of power uh, are basically just prolong, like for instance, when they're in Lothlorien, they say that this is an image of the Elder Days because it's a time. It's like so much is focused on the fact that it's a timeless area, and
Right.
Rivendell too, I think to a lesser degree. So
And
I
don't they
think
make
that
notice that when the company leaves Lothlorien, they're like, oh, no time has passed?
yeah, exactly. So I think that it's more or less my understanding is, like I said, someone will correct me. But it's more about the idea that they weren't made for Middle Earth essentially.
Forever.
And yeah, exactly. So they're immortal, but like the West is their home.
The Grey
And
Havens.
yeah, exactly.
Well, you know what? It really is interesting because after we're done all of this, we will definitely get into the Silmarillion. But
Mhm.
in the meantime, definitely welcome anyone who is much more well versed in all of this and would like to properly educate us. We will definitely give you a shout out next time
Oh yeah, fans are
we're
always jumping at the
chatting.
bit to correct. So go for
Oh,
it because
love it.
even though I just got out, this was in the fall, but I had done a reread of the Silmarillion because I retained like these books, but to a much larger degree, I retained nothing. And so
Right.
it was really insightful. And I mentioned this last time, but it makes reading the book so much more rich. It's
Mhm.
crazy because like they allude to things that you when like it's I don't want to dwell on this for too long, but it's worth mentioning. It's such a master stroke by Tolkien, where as a first time reader, where like names like like Arendelle and the idea like a brief mention of the Silmaril or Beren and Luthien and Numenor and all of this, it when you go in and you don't know it, it gives the Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings just like an unbelievable like sense of history, and you're like, this was alive, this world was alive. Like, how cool is it that there are tales within a tale and
Right.
they're not important to the plot, so you don't need to dwell on them and you don't feel like you're missing out. But when you become aware of them, it adds like a depth. So it's like both experiences add to the plot essentially. I think
Mhm.
it's masterfully done.
No, it's very true. And I mean, I also have read the Silmarillion, but years ago, and it's so dense. It's like reading a textbook in a way. So
Mhm.
I really didn't retain a lot of it. So we'll definitely have to reread and then chat through it. And in the meantime, we welcome any corrections or insults based on our weak, pale interpretations of
Yeah,
the elves
exactly.
themselves in particular. But what initially got us on this train was, okay, yes, Arwen's life in the movies is tied to the ring, and Elrond comes to the Rohirrim and he gives the reforged Narsil, so Andril, to Aragorn, and he has some fabulous lines. What is it? Put aside the ranger, become who you were born to be.
That's right.
It's very cool and I love it. So I'm
Yeah, it's
really
a
happy
great
that part is
scene.
in the movie.
And and
Um,
Elrond is great, both in the books and in the movies. So it's always nice to get more screen time and a necessary thing. But like you said, this chapter, um, as of yet, maybe one of the ones with the most differences. So
because
you
it's
can
not
you can
Elrond
kick
at
us
all.
off.
It's
Yeah.
his son. So Elrohir and Elredin,
Yeah,
I
Elladan and
believe.
Elrohir is how I would say.
Elladan
I
and
don't, but I don't
Elrohir.
know. The pronunciations are always so up in the air.
Well, I was right on Fudgy Bulger, so we're gonna go with
Yeah,
you
well,
on this
there you go.
one.
Take the
Um,
W.
but no, it's interesting, and they actually arrive with all the Rangers, so all the Dunedain, and
Mhm.
they're there to help Aragorn. And they are the ones who deliver this message from Elrond that essentially tells Aragorn that he needs to go through the paths of the dead in order to, get this kind of saving grace for
Yeah, they
the
don't
battles
allude
to
to it. They
come.
don't allude to anything of what the paths of the dead are. Is it again? Because one interesting thing, because you said Elrond sends them. I think you're right, but I also remember in the Two Towers, in the chapter of the White Rider, Gandalf brings out them up when he was in Lothlorien, he's like, Galadriel has a message for each of you.
That's right.
But
And
it must have been Elrond who sends obviously his sons.
well, it must be Galadriel and Elrond communicating in some way. That's another thing I love in the
Through that like
movies when
embrasure, like when they're looking at each other.
yes. I love that. And they're like just speaking in their minds.
Yeah,
Oh,
just
it's
like
very like
making
Professor
serious
X.
faces. It'd be like taking a dump, talking to Galadriel.
Oh my, you are so
Elrond's a little more
crude.
lordly.
I don't believe that elves poop. I mean, I'm just going to put that out there and I'm happy to be
They probably
corrected. I mean, they
don't.
eat
Like
lembas,
once
but
an
no, there's
age.
no way. Or it like smells like roses and just comes out and
Yeah.
like immediately a tree grows or something. But yeah, no, I don't think Elrond's taking a dump while he's speaking with Galadriel, but I do think there's a connection there. So maybe this is Galadriel being the highest power is probably leading things, but the only reason I mention Elrond is because my understanding is that his sons deliver a message from Elrond, and it is essentially seek the paths of the dead.
Yeah. I know. I think you're right. And they're also bringing something which we find out what it is later, but they're like some mysterious
Staff,
pole.
or yeah.
Shrouded in black. And yeah, so the Dunedain and the Sons of Elrond, the Grey Company. It's very cool, and you don't get much of them out of like as far as characters go. I even forget the name of the main Dunedain. Helgir, something like this, maybe.
Oh, it is something like that. I didn't even write it down because you're right. They're a brief moment. Certainly, you
Yeah.
understand why they're not in the movies.
No, I agreed, but it's a very neat chapter, and I'm trying to think immediately. So Aragorn runs off, and Legolas and Gimli follow him. There's a great quote from him. Maybe I think I have it in my notes. Just give me half of a second. But it's Aragorn explaining how the parting with Mary is. Yeah, there go three that I love, and the smallest not the least. He knows not what end he rides, yet if he knew, he still would go on. It's just great. Like they really do a great job at showing the bond of the fellowship in the books.
Absolutely. No, they really do. And sometimes you might get the sense in the movies, and this is just my interpretation, but that Aragorn isn't necessarily super close with Merry or Pippin. They do. Aragorn and Merry have this nice moment when Pippin and Gandalf are riding off, where Merry's like, he's always followed me and I can't protect him now. And so you see that a little bit, but the books just give you more opportunity to really dive into the relationships. And that's certainly an epic quote that really shows it. But a big difference is that when Aragorn leaves with Legolas and Gimli and the Grey Company of the elves and the Dunedain, he fully shares what he's doing. So in the movies, he leaves on the eve of battle, and the men are like, "It's hopeless, God, even Aragorn's abandoning us." But in the books, he's like, "I have to go to the paths of the dead." And everybody is like, "What are you doing? You're going to die. You're doomed. We're sorry to lose you." And he's just like, "Well, this is what I have to do. I'm sorry." And so he has autonomy to do whatever he will. But he even tells Eowyn what he's doing when he sees her in Rohan or in Mithuseld. And she's like, "Please don't. Like, what are you doing?" And you kind of have a little bit of a moment with them. But, he actually is very open about what he's doing, which is certainly a huge contrast in the movies.
He doesn't even necessarily know. Like, he knows obviously the lore of the world, but I don't even think at this point he knows specifically what it is that he's going. Like, I think he does to a degree, but no, you're right. And that is quite a difference. I remember a few years ago, and you were actually present when I got this message, but a friend of mine had asked because she had watched the movies, and she's like, "Why does he not just explain what he's doing? Like, I'm gonna go save the day, essentially." And it's a good point. I think it's, again, like, go figure. It's better done in the books, and I think that they could have kept that in the films because of the despair of the characters. Like,
agreed.
Like Éomer is for sure that he will never, and who has a growing love for Aragorn. I really like their bond. But he's certain that Aragorn will not return. Theoden says that he's like, we're never going to meet each other again.
You're right.
Which is true. And Éowyn, who is still scorned, but it's not as over the top Aragorn is less of a bad guy. In his little love triangle.
Okay, well, we certainly have to talk about the Éowyn character because I don't really think we've done that yet. She's made such short appearances in Two Towers. This is where you really get to see her. But before we get into her in the books, I do say this often that, of course, Aragorn believes that Arwen has gone to the land of her people, that she's not around anymore. But he is just the eyes he's giving Éowyn in the movies. It's like, what are you doing, pal? Like,
he puts the blanket up over her in Mithuseld, and he's like, it's not yet dawn. Like strokes her hand or something.
And I mean, whatever, these are all very harmless things, but my God, if I was Eowyn, I would fall hard and fast. Like, it's Aragorn. And there's this moment when I believe it's, so I'm going way back. I think it's Two Towers movie. Yes, certainly. When they're riding off to the wargs are coming and he's leaving like the women and children and Eowyn, and he just like he turns around on his horse and he's just giving her this searing
Great
look. And
shot.
when I see it, I'm like, oh my
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
I mean,
It's
just
like
why
because
are you doing her like
he
this?
holds the gaze too. And he's like, yeah.
He's crushing her. But no,
Now, to be fair though, in the movies, he's pretty certain that Arwen is leaving.
yes.
So he's like,
yes.
well, I'm gonna be
Keeping his
king.
options
I'm
open.
gonna need a queen. And Eowyn fits the character. She's a great character in both the films and the books.
She is. I love her in the films, and she's a little more like human in some way, because in the books, she also is just like another one of these very kingly, clearly comes from this, like, she's not Numenorian, but this bloodline of
Yeah.
great kings. And
They all have
she
gray
is,
eyes.
yes, exactly. The gray eyes must be not a recessive gene, I don't know, but she's just really powerful in both. And I mean, certainly when she has her epic moment, which we'll get to in our next good takes when we talk about Pelennor Fields, but even before that, she's always shown in her armor. Like, even though they won't let her go with them, rather, Theoden and Aemir are not unused to seeing her in armor, and she has an epic moment in the movies where she's swinging her sword around and Aragorn like pulls his sword up. Even that's a little bit foreplay, like, come on. But no, she has like this really impressive power in the books, and she has it in the movies, but she's just more human, which is kind of refreshing to see in a movie. But a little bit of a different character. The essence of who she is certainly the same throughout. And that actress, Miranda Otto, I had to write her name down because I'm not familiar with her from anything else.
Idea.
No, but
No,
she does a good
neither am
job.
I.
And she showcases this like really deep sadness that's so evident in the book and movie
Yeah.
Eowyn, and she just kills it. She does a really, really good job. So I really like Eowyn in both. It's not like a Denethor books, movies situation by any means.
No, she's it's pretty accurate. Because even like her, in my estimation anyways, her greatest piece of dialogue is both in the books and the films. And when she just goes on about how like she doesn't fear pain or death, she fears the cage and she wants renown. And Aragorn is like, well, he'll do things that are as honorable but with no renown. And she's like, you wouldn't say this just because I'm a woman.
Yeah.
But a prophecy will be fulfilled. So Eowyn will have her the last laugh, so to speak.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm jumping all over the place, but that reminds me, because it does happen a little bit later, and I believe it's in Gondor. I can't actually recall where in the books this is, but they actually allude to this prophecy that the Witch King of Angmar, so the leader of the Nazgul, yes, he cannot be killed by a man. So they have these moments in the movies, where the Witch King says to Eowyn, like, no man can kill me. But they literally spell out in these books, there is a prophecy that he will not be taken down by a man.
Yeah, but I mean, like, I don't think anyone for the first time, if they had no idea of what was coming, I don't think anyone would read it. I'd be like, oh, well, a woman's gonna kill him. Or Hobbit, I think it's purposefully, obviously, like, left up to be like he's unkillable is essentially what
I guess so. But I still think it's interesting. And I mean, it's a tag team. It's Hobbit, woman.
Yeah, win we'll get into it, but with the blade.
Yeah. It's cool that the prophecy came out. One more thought I had in the Paths of the Dead is there's this understanding that Isildur is the one who cursed these men because they didn't come. So Isildur just has crazy powers too. Like, there's so much power in this world that I can't even quite grasp. It's really interesting.
No, again, because we spoke about it before, but it's like the power of oaths and promises.
Yeah.
And how much power, like you said, how much power they have. And you're left to wonder, how much is it having like the blood of Westernesse, like Numenorian blood, and versus like how much is it of just the nature of the world where your words really matter. There's an instance where when they're in what's it called, Harrowdale, I forget, but anyways, outside of Rohan, where they're gonna ride to war, and Pippin, or Merry rather, he's expressing his want to go to ride with the Rohirrim, and he's like, he has a love, I love their relationship, but he has a love for Theoden, and he's like, I would follow you even to the paths of the dead. And then Theoden, like, very sternly is like, don't speak like that like don't speak like don't be, he uses the word like an omen. He's like, don't
Mhm.
talk of omens, and he's like, because there's more than one way to the paths of the dead. But
Right.
but it's this idea of words have real power. And like we
Yes.
could go back to Fellowship when Gandalf is using his spells, they're words of command. Like speech is almost perhaps the most magical thing in
Very
Middle Earth.
true. No, that's very true. It's a really good way to look at it too, because I was just thinking, like, what is Sildor? He's so
Mhm.
magical, but I think you're right. It comes down to the power of speech and the power of oaths, which we saw with Gollum having to swear that oath on the ring, and then these men um, who swore the oath to Isildur. So it's very interesting how that all comes to be. And then the
You want to
actual
dwell
paths of the
on the
dead.
paths of the dead for a moment? Because quite a
Yeah,
lot
let's
happens when they go up.
for
Um,
sure.
I think
Um,
it's quite cool how one like how like it's expressed like the darkness of the cave, how people just don't go
mhm.
there. You're not really sure what to expect. And I loved it at this before they go in, how they're all cowering in fear, essentially, except for Aragorn. And I think there's a line about Legolas because he's an
Legolas does
elf.
not fear the dead. He's
Like
so above
Gimli,
that.
who's like, he has that funny line in the movies, but he really hates it. He's terrified. I think.
And it's
Oh, go ahead.
It's a line in the books too. He says, "A thing unheard of, an elf will go underground
That's
where a
right.
dwarf
Yeah.
dare not." And then he runs in, and they, like we said, they kind of characterize Gimli a little more in the movies, but he does have that moment, and
Mhm.
that I think that's what spurs him to actually go in too.
Yeah, yeah, his pride.
Hmm.
But as we saw with Shelob's lair, uh, and Minas Morgul, and to an extent Moria, Tolkien is really good at writing horrible places. You like it's like the way that it's described, it's like it's less, you don't get the sense like in the films of like this is like a ghostly city or anything like that. There's not a lot of description of the actual like tunnel that they're going through,
Right.
but it through the characters, it's so cool. Like at one point, Gimli is crushed to his knees in fear, essentially.
Yeah.
And he's like, he's like, and he's so close to breaking. There's a line how it says he was about to essentially run back in madness, but they just reached the end. Like they
Yeah.
were all at their end. And there's a few lines, it happens both, not to go on a tangent here, but both before they enter and then when they get out. And it says how
Yeah.
essentially it's only Aragorn's will that carried them
Guides
through.
everyone. Yeah.
Mhm.
No, it's true. And it's not necessarily the place because as you said, there's not a ton of description and it's not like this greenish, ghostly pale. It's just blackness. But what Tolkien's amazing at describing is despair. Like he just
Mhm.
captures the despair of the characters. And he does this again at the Siege of Gondor. But while we're talking about Paths of the Dead, that's what he's really showcasing. And in Gimli almost being driven mad by it, that's a perspective that you see a lot of during their moment of walking through the paths of the dead, but it's terrifying. Like I was reading it in the dark again, trying to get my dog to sleep. It's like, oh my God, this is so freaky. Like
Mhm.
there's like a horror element there that he's really capturing. And I think
Exactly.
it
And
does
like,
come down to the despair.
no, you're right. And like it's like the war probably had a great effect on that.
Yeah.
Um, and like they come across the one dead guy in there essentially, who I think they later more or less confirm it's like what was his name? I
No,
forget.
his name
Belgor,
is
Belgord,
Brago
Bolgord.
because
No,
that's
but
the
he's the son
horse's
of
name.
Brago. Brago is
Oh,
like the
that's right.
second king,
Baldur,
and he's like
Baldur,
his
son of
something
Brago.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just quite cool how he's in there and he's like reached up and you don't really know like what is this place. And there's like
Yeah.
carvings along the door that he's trying to get into. But it's totally left up to mystery, but like you said, the despair is done really well.
Yeah.
Um, and Aragorn's leadership, of course. I don't want to dominate the conversation, but there is one element that it made me think just because there is this, it's not my own idea by any stretch of the imagination. It's well documented. There's a corpus of like this idea floating around,
Mhm.
and I've been aware of it. Where, again, just to bring it up, like Tolkien was a religious guy, and he, obviously that there are elements of that in the book. And
Yeah.
there's one element where like there's like these three persons of Christ, and we won't dwell on them. I think later on we can because it's quite cool about how essentially the three persons are king, prophet, and priest, and they're three,
Right.
and the three main characters have elements of this. Frodo being the priest who carries his cross, the ring. Gandalf was the prophet, often scorned and turned away, but very wise. And then Aragorn, go figure, the king. And I've been aware of this for some time. I just think it had some depth. But there was one moment when he's speaking to Eowyn, and he's like, "I go on a path appointed to me." And I was like,
Right.
and that's when like that's when I remembered all of this. It's like, oh, like this sounds familiar because at this point we didn't really talk about it, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, but at this point, Aragorn has revealed himself to Sauron through the
Right.
stones.
That is right. He has. And I believe he did that in Two Towers. No?
No, I don't think so. He's doing
Oh,
it when
no,
he's in
it's
the
the
Hornburg.
beginning of that's right. Yeah. So it's the beginning of this book. So no, we haven't talked about it, but that is right. He knows his time has come and he uses the Palantir to which he also does in the movies. And Sauron
But way
uses that
later.
opportunity to exactly and to show him Arwen dying. And then he actually breaks the even star that she gave him, or whatever it is. But yeah, that's right. So I did find that really interesting. He reveals himself to Sauron, and it does seem like from this point on, he is just kind of on, as you said, this path that was appointed to him, and he understands that he has to. I mean, he's always taken on the role of he knows who he is. He is the king of Gondor, the last true king, and that's something he wants to fulfill. But it seems more of the path is laid before him at this point versus in terms of how he's going to get there.
Yeah, and the character almost changes. Like they notice, like when he comes down from the tower with the Dunedain, like he's looks like a man who hasn't slept in days, and he's just sterner and like more distant.
Mm-hmm.
And Gimli makes like a question, I think, like a sincere, innocuous question, just about if he saw Sauron or like what did he say, and Aragorn kind of snaps back, and he's like, "You don't know who you're talking to. Like you're
Yeah,
forgetting who I am. Like
yeah.
obviously I didn't like, you know." But he alludes to the fact that the willpower, the battle with Sauron was very he's like I almost didn't have the strength.
Right. And that's when Gimli almost reveals like, "Oh, you didn't say too much, did you?"
Yeah,
And
that's
that's when
right. That's
Aragorn's like,
exactly right.
"Bitch, please, do you know who I am? Like, I'm the
Yeah.
only one who could have done this. You do it, Gimli. You talk to
Yeah,
Sauron."
exactly. And but so there's like a change in character. Not that he's a different person by any means, but like you were saying, like it's now more real. And
Yeah,
we'll find out later, but by him doing that once more, it's like the enemy hurts itself
that's right.
because there's a moment when Sauron sends his forces out because Aragorn, he's worried that maybe Aragorn has the ring, or so it's like a
He
hasty
acts in
decision.
haste.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
exactly. But that's when you first get this idea of like again, I don't want to dwell on it, but I just think for those that are interested, because I feel like you get this sense of depth because it's a story that's just like in our culture.
Hmm.
But there's so many like harkening backs to him having this like literally a lordly presence. Because when he goes to the like when Christ is killed, he descends into hell, like the harrowing of Hades, I believe it's called. And so when Aragorn goes into the path of the dead follow him. He's the only one. He's the only living person that can enter here. Like he's brought his troop, but he's
Right.
the only one that would be able to come out alive. And not only do they follow him, he's the only one that is able to fulfill the oath and like
Yeah.
essentially forgive their sins.
Yeah.
He like and you mentioned like Isildur, and that just made me think of this. But how he's like Isildur cursed them, and like Isildur was the last like real king of Gondor, which
Yeah.
is like the idea of the King David, and Christ is like he's the inheritor of David's kingdom. I
Right.
don't know. I just like once I like I said, I read that line, and then it's just like some light went off, and I was like, oh wow, like I don't know if anyone else would find that interesting, but I thought that the symbolism of these characters, then my head just started going. I was like, oh, there's
Yeah.
something here.
Oh, there
But really
certainly
cool.
is. Well, and as you said, Tolkien
Everyone's
was very religious. That obviously played a deep role in the book. And there's a whole element of that I don't certainly feel qualified to speak on. I think you would a little more. Certainly, we had similar upbringings in terms of religion, but not a path I have devoutly stayed on to say
no,
the
no, no,
least.
yeah,
But
totally.
you do have a lot of understanding of some of those stories, and not to say stories, but kind of religious backgrounds and what have you within Christianity. And certainly Tolkien was influenced by that. And he obviously injected some of that into the characters. And to hear you explain the priest, prophet, and king, I think no question, it certainly sounds like what it is. And
It's just super
the
cool because it just adds like a depth. Not that it's needed, but I feel like you just get this sense of like not like I've heard this story before, but I think it just goes to
like an
Tolkien's
allegory.
again his yeah, but not even like an allegory, but just how he because it's not only through like the Christian narrative because he does this with Anglo-Saxon and Norse. Like
Yeah.
there's similarities to Beowulf. He pulls it just he has this unbelievable ability to make the old new and seem
Mm-hmm.
both familiar and then also very fresh.
Yeah.
Anyways, I just thought that was it made me so excited when I read that. I was like, this is just like so cool how so much is in such simple descriptions of just like little zombies coming out to fight essentially.
No, it's true. And there just seems to be a bit more gravity to it. It's a cool moment in the
Yeah.
movies, but this like back and forth, like, what say you? Will you fight with me? But there's
It's a
not
little
really any
cheesy.
of that. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But and even the look of the dead is cheesy. Whereas in this, I mean, when the dead are following Aragorn and they're going through these smaller villages, people are freaking out. They're like closing their blinds, they can't look
Yeah.
upon them. And it's just this again, it goes like it's a lot more horror and terrifying.
No,
And then that
exactly.
is when they reveal that what Elrond's sons brought Aragorn, that,
It's
not
like a
spear,
standard.
staff, yeah, is
Yeah.
kind of the showing that he is the leader of this army, for lack of a
Yeah, and
better
he's
word.
revealed himself as king essentially at
Yeah,
this from this point on. It's like he doesn't have the crown, but it seems like after the Palantir, he's king.
he's king. Yeah. And
Yeah.
it kind of does justify or explain in some way why the movies decided to create this arc for Aragorn where he did not want to be king, and then at this point he is, because the shift is a lot more subtle in the books, but he certainly
Mhm.
does become more kingly, as you said, in this moment. So the movies do a good job of having this moment happen. He puts aside the ranger, he becomes king. And so
Mhm.
it's a lot more clear when you're just watching the movies with no background to it, that this is the moment when there's been that shift. And when he gets into battle, which we'll get into later, he's very much battling as king, and
Mhm.
leading these people and leading them through the paths of the dead and through to war. And obviously Theoden continues to lead the Rohirrim because Aragorn's not with them. But we'll see as we get deeper into Return of the King, how Aragorn does take up that mantle, especially when they actually go to the Black Gate, which
Yeah,
down the road for
totally.
us. But it's
No, very
interesting.
cool. And that chapter ends in a great. I just forget again verbatim the line, but how like he drove these guys on a journey that no
Mm-hmm.
mortal man could have like bear to do. Like it's so epic. Once he becomes king, you're just like, I'd follow you, Aragorn.
Oh my God,
Follow you.
absolutely. I would follow you 100%. But no, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say on Paths of the Dead. I feel like we
No,
did
no,
cover a
I
lot of
think
it. And some
I
really
think that was
interesting.
I think that was it. I like I said, my biggest. I just like we kind of touched on the end there, but I appreciate the movies. I love them. But I was like, this is less cheesy. I never thought that it was cheesy in the movies, but after reading it in this book, I was like, wow, this is actually like deadly serious.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I
yeah.
agree. I mean, the movies still do a great job for what they are, but it is just totally different in the books. And I think you really succinctly put it together in terms of what's captured, how Tolkien describes it, and how it makes you feel when you're reading it, because it's
Mhm.
it's certainly a lot more despairing and terrifying. So yeah, it's interesting. But right after that, it goes. I guess we go back to is it back to Rohan a little bit? Or just trying to remember
You
where we
go
are
from
here.
there to yep, the muster of the Rohirrim. So then
Yeah,
that's Merry and Theoden.
yeah,
And one thing I don't want to dominate, but another thing I thought very cool was is like the dichotomy between Pippin and Denethor and Merry and Theoden because they're juxtaposed
totally.
perfectly against each other.
Yeah.
Um, I love Theoden and Merry. I think they're a
They have
good
such
little
a
troop.
great relationship. Well, and Theoden is so much kinder. I mean, even though
Yeah.
Denethor is kinder in the books than he is in the movies, he's not this like bitter, angry old man. He has this air about him that he needs to be respected. He commands respect, whereas Theoden is like this kindly old man, as Gandalf says at one point, and he obviously respects Barry, but he's just really happy to have him around. And it also, you get this, I mean, it's mentioned several times and you've kind of alluded to it too, but Theoden certainly doesn't believe he's going to survive this. And so I think
No.
he's really just kind of making sure that he's leaving this world in like in a good way. He's maintaining
No,
these
good
strong
point.
relationships, and like he's happy to have this experience with the Hobbitland, and that, I guess, whatever they call hobbits, right?
Yeah, I mean, I have such a hard time saying that. And it's spelled so strange. I don't know.
I don't know if I'm saying it right. That's the story of
No, I
my
think
life
you
when I'm
got it. I
reading
think
these
you got it. I
books.
just every time I see it, I'm like, like, like just saying it like a simpleton.
Oh my gosh. Well, no, but it's a very interesting relationship they have. It's very warm. There's true love there. Whereas
Mhm.
with Theoden, or no, sorry, Denethor and Pippin, it's a lot more commander and soldier. And
Yeah.
Denethor demands that respect, whereas Mary just genuinely has that respect for Theoden because he loves him.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't really know what kicked it off, like why he developed this love for him, but he did, and it's very quick. Um, And Theoden is, like you were saying, just like much more gracious, and like he
Mhm.
doesn't have like where Pippin will be standing at Denethor's side waiting on him. When Mary goes into like the tent essentially to wait on Theoden, Theoden's like, I'm not gonna like pull up a seat. Like he has a seat pulled up beside him. And he's like, just
Yeah.
sit,
They
like
eat at
hang
the same
out.
table.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
No, it's
I
true.
I loved I really loved the depth of that because it
Yeah.
makes more sense why Mary would then like again it's done well in the films and it's also touched on in the books how he doesn't want to be the only one left out in the battle. But it
Right.
also just gives it a little more depth where he's like, I also love these people and like what they've done for like the sacrifices they've made. Like I want to
Fight with
contribute to
them.
him. Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. And it's a little sadder too, and more emotion behind it when Theoden explains to Mary, like, you can't come, because in the movies
Mm,
it's a little bit, look, none of my
colder.
riders can
It's your
carry
burden.
you. Yeah. Like, I will say no more on this, and then just rides away. But he's like, look, I understand you want to come. This is the reality. We are fighting for our lives, man. They do have the messenger from Gondor who's like, you need to come right now. By the time you come at the rate, like where from the location that you're at right now, it's going to be too late. So we need Rohan immediately. And so Theoden is exhausted. He's just fought the battle of his life essentially at Helm's Deep. And now he has to do it all over again. And he's explaining to Mary this, like, I'm not going to see you die, and we have to move fast, and we just don't have space. Like, we can't afford to bring you along. And
Mm.
this isn't something you want to be brought along for anyway. But he does respect where Mary's coming from. And he seems to have that moment. And again, the movies can't do it all. They don't have time,
No, no, of
this
course
whole
not. Yeah.
piece and this whole dialogue. But then that's when Dernhelm is introduced. And so
Yeah.
Dernhelm is a very mysterious
A
individual who
light,
keeps
small
their,
statue warrior.
yeah.
I wonder who it could
So
be. I
three
looked
guesses
this
who
up
that is.
actually there because I don't know why I felt inclined to do so, but I was like, maybe this must be like most of Rohan, like an old English name. Anyways, it means
Mm.
hidden protector. Thought that was a cool little
Really?
tidbit.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. That is very cool.
It
Well,
makes me
it
want to
certainly
go and look up
tracks.
like many of the name meanings the Tolkien
Totally.
does to describe himself.
Oh
I
my
don't know
gosh.
why that
Well,
possessed me, but yeah. I was like,
no, it's interesting that you did that. I bet that there is a lot of, like, there's so much to this. You could literally like, people study Tolkien in
yeah,
their
yeah, yeah.
lives. There's just so much to uncover, and that is really interesting. Certainly very apt for Dernhelm, who doesn't speak. And there's this very poignant moment where Mary makes eye before Dernhelm introduces themselves and
Mhm.
tells Mary that they'll take them along. Um, Mary catches Dernhelm's eye and is terrified because he says he sees these gray eyes that are ready for death, have no hope, and
Mhm.
are just ready to
Yeah.
die.
No, like you
And
said, a
it's
very poignant moment.
creepy. Yeah.
No, because when I read that, I wasn't aware that that was Dernhelm at the time because
Spoiler alert,
he just
Dernhelm
says
is
he just
Eowyn.
yeah, 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 exactly. But he just says it's just a boy essentially. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
why was this given? I was like, that's very cool. I guess just to add depth into like the fear of war and like the nature of that. It's not all glory and renown. But then you
Right.
find out that this was the character, and I was like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Um,
And that
but
doesn't, we
yeah,
are not going to get that reveal in these first 5 chapters, to
no, I
my
think it only comes.
understanding.
It's when she reveals herself to the Witch King, I believe. I could be wrong.
That's right. I mean, I think
Yeah.
that you get the hints enough along the way. And also, if
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
seen the
yeah. I
movie,
think you
you
should know.
know, yeah,
She says like when he asks, like, I've not met you, and she's like, you don't know who I am, like all for the better or
yeah,
whatever. But then
yeah.
there's like a line there, like, come on, man, you're smarter than this. You're the smart of the two, the smart one of the
I
two.
know. Okay, well, that's
Yeah.
not saying much. Don't even get me
No, it's
started on
not.
Pippin's intelligence.
There's a hilarious line because we never really spoke about Baragond, who I think is a fantastic character. This is back
Right.
now in Minas Tirith, but there's a
Yeah.
hilarious line that he has to Pippin about how he's Prince of the Halflings and how the city expects when the Rohirrim to come, every rider to have a hobbit
A
with
halfling.
them, and
Yeah.
like and it's like 5,000 hobbits. That's a great image.
No, that's
It's
so funny.
just
And so
fun.
Baragon is one of the, I mean, not a captain, but he's a soldier in the Gondor army.
I
I
love
mean, I think he leads something, but
No, I think he's just a man at arms, and that's what
yeah.
I think is great about his character because he's like one of the first characters. I mean, you were saying about how like in relation to Eowyn, how she's also like lordly and larger than life.
Hmm.
Baragond is like he's finally the first person you meet that is
Just your
not
average
like some
guy.
high nobility. He's a great guy. He's a good, honest man. But he's just a soldier. Like he's like
Yeah.
one of the few characters that doesn't, aside from the hobbits, that is not some like Gimli is the son of Gloin, like more or less a prince in some real sense.
Right.
Legolas is a prince. Aragorn is a king. Like everyone has like this like larger than life And then there's
Yeah.
Baragon, who's just a man, and he's a great guy. I don't know. I love their little interactions when they're looking out east.
Pippin and
Mhm.
Baragon. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
that's right.
Baragon is kind of showing him around the city and getting him familiar with everything, getting him outfitted. And yeah, like you said, Baragon's just an average guy. He's got his son. His son shows Pippin
Yeah.
around. Like, they're just normal people. And it does show how war affects everybody because the big players, the kings and the princes, have these main roles and they become the main characters, like in this book. But these wars affect everybody. And Baragon is
Mhm.
just one example of the average kind of person that has been pulled into it and that has his life and his wife and his family and kids. And,
Yeah, he loves his
it's still going to
city, and
impact him too.
yeah, exactly. And he's just, yeah,
Yeah.
like this is what I have to do. Like there's no
Yeah.
run from this. You mentioned it just about how it's like Middle Earth, like just people that have to fight. I think it's just a great segue into the Wild Men. What were the
Right.
Pukul guys? With
Yeah.
the Rohirrim are on their way to Gondor. I
And
don't
so
know.
what we're
Like, how
doing,
did
we're
you
kind
think
of
about that?
skipping ahead because we're skipping the Siege of Gondor, which is chapter 4, because then we go back into
True. Yeah,
Rohan.
that's
But I
true.
think
That's
while we're
true.
talking about Rohan, let's just get into it because that's exactly it. In chapter 5, the Rohirrim are making their way to Gondor. They're going as fast as they can, and they start to realize with guides that are being sent ahead that the road is blocked, and
Mhm.
that, to your point, Sauron has had to make haste with the war. He's seen that Aragorn has revealed himself, so he is hastily moving things along. And he's like, we got to attack, we got to strike down. So the main paths, and again, not something that's shown in the movies because there's just
Not at
not that
all.
time. But Rohan can't essentially get to Gondor. And because these things are happening, these moments, chapter 4 and 5 are happening simultaneously,
Mhm.
Gondor and Rohan's perspective. So in Gondor, they're saying, we know that the roads are blocked. Rohan can't come. Rohan won't come. We are utterly screwed. And then on the flip side, Rohan is like, what are we going to, I don't know how to get through this. The roads are blocked. And then the wild
Mhm.
men appear. And I loved that because they explain, like, look, this isn't our fight. We're not going to fight, but we know the old paths and these orcs. They have a different word for orc that I think I wrote down, but I can't recall, like
Ganache or
organ or
something like
something.
this.
Yeah. And they're like, they're so, they're hubris. They think they know everything, but there are these old paths that they don't know about. And we're happy to lead you there. We only ask that if you survive this, just stop hunting our people. But, it's no good for anyone if the Dark Lord completely takes over this earth. So let us guide you safely there and you can have your war. And, it's very cool because, like, it's just another example of this is affecting the entire Middle Earth. And these people
Mhm.
are willing to do their part to some degree.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly right. And I think it's just like I just don't think it's something that the movies, again, like it's not a criticism because like you said, they can't do everything, and if they tried, it would be horrible. But you get more of the sense of Middle Earth in the books. Like it's not
Yeah.
just Rohan and Gondor. It's like, like there's a host. The implication is that there's armies that are going north now.
Yeah.
Um, and this is essentially what's blocking them, plus the fire and the trenches and whatnot. But we see this in the south with all of the named places of Gondor, where like that character Prince Imrahil is from,
Mm-hmm.
and just how people like there's more east. Like you just get this idea that it's more middle. There's more to Middle Earth.
And
The
these
character,
three,
I picture the Pukul men because they're described as wild men, but when they're given a physical description, they almost seem like not ants, but like trolls or something. Did you?
yeah,
How
no,
did you?
that's okay. Well, this is so weird because I always just draw from like other experiences. And obviously I read these books first, but in George R. R. Martin's books, in the Game of Thrones books, they talk about the wild men that roam. I don't know how familiar you are if you remember. I know we've read the books. But when they're
One
going
read like years ago.
right, when they're going to the Eyrie, so when Catelyn Stark has taken Tyrion Lannister and they're going to the Eyrie, and then the wild men attack them,
Oh, that's right. The ones
that's
that Tyrion brings
literally,
into his
yeah,
service.
yes,
Okay.
that's literally how I picture these guys.
Yeah,
But I think
okay.
you make a good point. I mean, I'm kind of looking at it from that's like a that's like a really base interpretation. Like, to your point,
No,
they're ancient
no.
beings, and I think you make a good point of comparing them kind of to Ents in a way because they certainly have like a more ancient
Yeah, I
feel
don't
to
think that
them.
they're like long lived. I just know when like I just remember when he was bowing down. It's like he had like a naughty brow and like how he's a really short. I don't know. Like there's no right or wrong way to interpret it. But now I'm interested in, like you said last time with the Ents, because that was
Yeah,
another thing that was like hard to place and different
yeah.
than the movies. I want to look up at fan art, see
Do
what
it.
people have done
I
of
found a
the
terrifying
wild
fan
men.
art version. I had to go through so many, but I found a terrifying one of Treebeard. I sent it to you. I'll put it in the notes
Yeah.
of that podcast that we did because, and I
Yeah,
got
we
to
can
find
link
who
it
this
in the
artist
description.
was. Totally, because I was like, this is it, and it's
Mhm.
terrifying, and this is how I pictured Treebeard. So yes, look up some fan art of these wild men because I think that's really interesting. But I think unless there's anything else to say about the wild men before we go any further as to when Rohan arrives, I think we got to go back to Gondor because Faramir's entrance is a huge component that we certainly have to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So stepping back a little bit, at this point, Paths of the Dead has happened, but it's before Rohan has encountered the wild men and knows that they need to rush to battle imminently. Faramir returns and the fellow beasts are on him and they're chasing him and the few men that he's brought with him into the city. Gandalf goes out, and that moment in the movies when Gandalf rides out and he's got his staff and the light and the music.
Haunting. And like the shaky cam, it's so well done.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And so it's good in the books too. I mean, it's an interesting, certainly the dichotomy of the dark fell beasts and the Nazgul versus the white light of Gandalf. But it's another very interesting moment when another conversation, another dialogue, when Faramir is coming back, he's reporting to Denethor and Gandalf and Pippin are there. They're having the same audience. And so Faramir is kind of telling his father everything that's happened. And then he says, but this is not the first halfling I've seen. Not 2 days ago, I ran into Frodo, and he kind of explains everything that happened. And I love that. I love the moment when Denethor calls Faramir a wizard's pupil. And he's like, do you think I've not noticed that you've been looking at Mithrandir this entire time? Did you say too much? Like, you're trying to hide things from me. And it's very clear that this halfling has the ring, which I sent Boromir to get. And like, how dare you just let him go? You've just, this random halfling is now wandering the lands. That's it. There's a witless halfling.
Pippin's just right there, just like, all right.
What it's actually accurate for Pippin though is the difference. But there's a moment when Faramir says that he ran into Frodo, Gandalf like sits upright and he clenches his hands and he shoots Pippin a look like, you shut up for once, Pippin. And Gandalf kind of says, oh my God, is that why the enemy is moving? Like, has he got it? Has something happened?
Exactly, yeah.
And he's terrified for Frodo. But then Faramir is like, no, based on the timeline here, he was actually clearly gearing up. This had nothing to do with Frodo. And then Gandalf, the legend and genius that he is, actually puts two and two together and is like, oh, Aragorn must have looked into the Palantir.
Yeah, which is crazy. I wasn't expecting him to say that because it's like, wow, like you said, the wisdom of Gandalf. I'm glad you brought that up though. I love that scene where it's like one of the few times you see Gandalf truly afraid. His hands are trembling, like he's grabbing the chair. I thought that was a beautiful moment because it just shows, it's just like, yes, obviously the implication, like you said, the enemy has got the ring, but the way that I interpreted it before he says that is like, he loves Frodo, and he's like, and he carries a lot of blame for the fact that Frodo is doing this task.
Yes.
And I think it's just like, what have I done to this poor good little guy?
Yeah. And you have those moments also in the movies, and they come way later. And like, just to go really far, when they're at the Black Gate and it's only in the extended, the mouth of Sauron comes out and he throws the mithril whatever thing that Frodo was wearing. And Merry and Pippin are crying out and Gandalf was like, silence, but in his eyes,
like you can catch the tears in his eyes.
Ian McKellen always, he just plays it so well.
He's Gandalf. He's one. I have no shame in him being my Gandalf.
No, I know we've said it before and we will continue to say it. So hear it because he is Gandalf. Absolutely. But I mean, anyway, getting way ahead of ourselves. But as you said, that moment of fear, it's one of the first, if maybe the only time you really see that emotion in Gandalf. And I agree with you. Yes, there's the fear of, oh my gosh, we've all failed. But I think first and foremost, it's what have I done? I did this. I sent Frodo on this journey and I've sent him to his ruin, and the relief he feels when Faramir explains, like, no, that's not what happened, and he's able to piece it together. But it's also interesting because Denethor's reaction there is very, of course, wizard's people, and speaking about how Boromir would have brought me this thing, and Gandalf gives him a reality check. He's like, he would not have. He would have stretched his hand out. He would have taken it. You're delusional. And Denethor fighting, clapping back. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Which I
appreciate Faramir having that line in the movies.
That's right, because he's the one who says that Boromir would have taken it, and it does make more sense in the movies too, because Faramir is trying to, in the movies more so, I think, show his father his quality, and his father has these blinders on when it comes to Boromir. Boromir can do no wrong, and Faramir's just trying to give him that reality check. Like, this thing is so much bigger than your lordly son. Like, it obviously would have taken him over. But yeah, it's really interesting how how they kind of, it's a very similar idea. Faramir is literally called the least loved son at some point, or loved less than Boromir. But it seems like Faramir feels that pain less in the books. He understands it,
Totally.
but in the movies, he's distraught. He wants his father's love and acknowledgement. And you know, there's parts of that in the books too, but he, again, it just comes back to Faramir being more confident. He knows who he is and he understands the differences between him and Boromir, and he's accepted them. And it's almost like, if my father can't accept them, that's awful, but it doesn't shake who I am, or it doesn't shake me to my core.
No, I think you're totally right. He's less like sniveling, because there is still that exchange where he asks Denethor if, like, you wish now that our positions were changed, and Denethor's like, yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah, I wish that. Yeah,
But you're right. But
yeah,
like you said, it's just like he's not, at least outwardly, devastated by that fact. I mean, he still throws his life away in a real sense.
going to Osgiliath.
But I think that Faramir would have just done that anyways. So
Yeah,
yeah, like you're absolutely right. He's more strong, and I get the change, and we spoke about this, but I get the
yeah.
change in the movies. But my God, yeah, I mean, the readers love Faramir when Faramir re-enters the city,
Mm-hmm.
both when he's okay and then when he comes back later injured, and everyone's just cheering for him and
Oh
crying and
yeah,
calling out for him. And when Baragon learns that Faramir might be dead, he
yeah.
weeps, like he bows, he's like he's weeping.
No, he has so
Um,
much love, and he fosters a real love among his people. Yeah, he's a
yeah.
great character. And so before he goes to Osgiliath, um, there was just 2 points I wanted to make. So again, the theme of pity comes up because Denethor is speaking again about you know, how they've thrown away a chance here. They could have hidden the ring, they could have whatever. And Gandalf says, you know, he even pities Sauron's slaves, and they had to go destroy
Yeah,
this
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
And it brings it back, you know, like there is this theme of pity is certainly there throughout the book, and Gandalf is usually at the helm of it because he is the most sage, wise, you know, bringing it all back to, yes, this is a war, but pity is not a flaw. It's not a negative thing. It's an understanding of both sides to this whole war.
Totally. No, I know. I think that's a wonderful point. And that line also it touched me because I wasn't expect even from Gandalf, I wasn't expecting that. Yeah. And then I think even in that conversation, or perhaps when they're in the tower, uh, and Theoden or sorry, not Theoden, Denethor is more or less like he's showing his hopelessness. And Gandalf has a moment and he's like, you are the Lord of Gondor only. I think it is actually in that, because he's talking about how,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the ring. He's like, you're the Lord of Gondor only, but he's like, as long as men are around and like time marches on, he's like, and think I'm mixing two different quotes, but like things that grow, essentially. He's like, I
Yeah.
will make sure, like, you know, like there is like Gandalf really, despite his fears and even his anger, he always is the one that carries a hope,
Yeah.
because when in that moment, Faramir describe like this the new first news that anyone was getting of Frodo, but he mentions Cirith Ungol, and
Mm-hmm.
that obviously terrifies Gandalf. But he has this great scene with Pippin later when he's like, even that, like he's like, I almost like my heart almost failed me or something in that
Mm-hmm.
moment. But he's like, but like there's like a secret hope in this. I think that's
Yeah.
where he talks about Sauron, but like mm, having recognized Aragorn. But
Yes.
he's
And
always the one
that's,
to pity. He's always the one to have hope and say, like, you have no
yes.
right to despair because you don't see the end. Like,
Not even the wisest can see all ends.
yeah,
No, that's so
exactly.
true. And it is in that, so it's right after that exchange, he's with Pippin, and that's where he's saying, like, my heart almost failed me. My God, they're going Cirith
Mhm.
Ungol. Why would they do that? And Pippin's like, why would they go with Gollum? And Gandalf says, I fear treachery of that miserable creature, but so it must be. Let us remember that a traitor may betray himself and do good that he does not intend, which goes back to
Mhm.
the evil shall oft mar evil, a certain theme that's been consistent throughout it.
Totally. Exactly right. Yeah. And always well put, because it's just like we said last time with Shelob, in her
Yeah.
greed, thrusting herself on the blade, essentially. Like
Yeah.
it's not, it never feels preachy, but no, so good point with that, with Gandalf's pity.
Yeah. No, I really I appreciate that. I mean, I understand why Gandalf is your favorite fellowship character. And
Oh,
it's
come on, he's the
certainly,
greatest.
I mean, it certainly makes sense. He's fantastic. So anyway,
Mhm.
after he has this moment with Pippin, that is when Faramir speaks with Denethor once again and says, you know, if you will have me do this, I will go to Osgiliath. And Denethor's like, yeah, that's my will. And then it's so sad because Faramir has this moment in the movies too, but he's like, farewell. And if I return, I hope you think better of me.
Mhm.
And I love this moment in the movies when he's slowly walking on his horse with his troop, and everyone is so despairing. Like they're so sad as they watch him go. They know there's no
Feeling the
hope. And
flowers.
yes, yes. And Gandalf runs up on Shadowfax and he's like, your father loves you, Faramir. He will remember it before the end. And that's like a verbatim. I mean, every quote is Tolkien. But that's exactly how it happens in the books too. And it's just so beautiful. And
It is,
your
it's a
heart just
beautiful
goes out to
scene. And
Faramir.
because and in that moment, Faramir is like very remote. And he's
Yeah.
going, that's when he's going on about like, why would I not like want to give my life away for like the beauty of the city or something like that?
Yeah, he's accepted
Or
it, but you
splendor.
know, he knows it's
Yeah, but
hopeless.
it's very well acted. Faramir is still incredible in the movies, but he doesn't hold,
True.
he's not his book counterpart, to be sure.
Well, they just gave him a bit of a different arc, a bit of a different character, but it's
Mhm.
played so well. And I do love Faramir in the movies. And that moment that you certainly can't really convey in a book, but doesn't happen at all, with Pippin singing "Home is
Mhm.
behind the world ahead" when the
Yeah,
Osgiliath charge is happening. Like, wow. And the tomato. I mean, we don't even need to
iconic.
talk about the tomato, but oh, dribbling down Denethor's
Yeah,
disgusting jowls. Anyway, that's another, just that
chicken.
whole scene is done so well. The chicken, all of it, I can't. But it's such a beautiful scene, and it just really shows the hopelessness of it all. But like you said, you know, Gandalf is encouraging everyone to not despair, to keep hope, even in these blackest moments. And we'll see it in just a moment. But again, the dawn brings forth new hope, and it certainly happens here.
100%. Yeah.
But before we
Well,
get there, is there anything else with the siege? Because I mean, before
yeah, yeah. I think
the
there's one
Rohan
important thing
piece,
that goes to what you just said about the hope and or but in the despair. One thing that and we were texting about this briefly before. One thing that the movies don't do well, and I get it as far as like the cinematography goes and the necessity of, actually like the technicality of filmmaking,
yeah,
but it's the darkness because you
yes,
really they throughout all of these chapters, for anyone who doesn't know, there's like the not like the cloud of Mordor has really extended itself over
that's right.
everything. And
There's no
it's,
dawn
I mean, in my
anymore.
mind's eye, how it's described is utterly black. It's
Yeah,
perpetual night. Like the Gandalf, even many characters, I think, say like the dawn will never come. And they're
yeah,
always wondering like what time is it? Like the way I'm viewing it is like how dark it is out right now in the dead of winter.
yeah.
And so
Well, it's
like
like
you the
11 p.m. for
fires
you.
when they're surrounded in the siege, they see the fires come up, but
Yeah.
it like on the men fear and they know that the Nazgul are flying overhead, just screeching,
Yes. And
and
men are
but they
falling
can't
to the
see them.
ground, like even the strongest men. And there, we talked about, is it just Frodo whose sight goes black when the Nazgul are around? But it's happening to everybody or many people in the city. And there's this
Yeah,
the fell beasts are circling, and the despair once again is just, oh my
I
gosh,
just
it's so well
yeah.
written.
So
It's
I think
terrifying.
it really is genius. It really sets the mood for all of these chapters because everything that's we just discussed that's happening is happening in the shadow. It's
Yeah.
so cool. And I totally forgot about that. Like I knew that Sauron sent out like a cloud, because in the movie is but anyways, you brought up the dawn, and that reminds me because when the Rohirrim are in the woods with the wild men, when Fala, some random Rohirrim comes up and he's like, I sense a change in the wind, like I
That's right.
smell the sea. And it's like we'll see what that becomes. But like you said, when the cock crows and the dawn comes, and this is the first time that, yeah, and I think even leading up to this, they mention in in the woods about like how dawn might bring some untold news, essentially.
Yeah.
It's another prevailing theme, but I just wanted to make sure that we brought up because it slipped my mind because I took it for granted, the horror of the siege and the time before it, and how cool it's depicted this
Yeah.
umbrage.
And that's, so I mean, we've missed a little bit. I know that Faramir, before we talk about what the dawn brings, Faramir ends up coming back from Osgiliath. He is near death. Denethor has this bedside vigil, and he's aged, and you can see in his face like he maybe didn't really expect his son to actually die or be this badly wounded. And in the movies, he says his line has ended, but in the books, he says my life is broken, and it crushes you so much more. Like he's
Yeah,
really feeling the loss. He's not just this hard, cold-hearted, oh my god, my heir. Like he sees his son and
that's
kind
a
of
son.
realizes
Yeah,
what he's done. And so he is very, very broken for it. And he says, we'll burn like the heathen kings of old, and we'll get into what happens there because it's not going to happen in these first 5 chapters. And then of course the siege is going on. So while the darkness is happening and the fell beasts and the Nazgul are flying, the whole city is despairing. They can see fires outside and the siege preparing. And I mean, in the movies, it happens instantaneously because we're not going to watch a siege set up, but it's much more terrifying in the books. Like you're watching the enemy plan and put these towers together, and like a real siege is about to take place. And again, they're throwing the heads, they're catapulting the heads of the dead men
it's
in, and
actually
just like
described more gross than I remember, like how some are mushed and mashed, but then
have the
still
eye of
people can
Sauron on them.
recognize like their friends who they walked with and or vacationed in the south. Like
it's gut-wrenching. And it is, they show those moments in the movies where the heads are coming over, but again, just the description, Tolkien is a master of penmanship.
Yeah, he may have seen a few heads
How
in his
he's
day.
saying it. Oh, well, I mean, God, that's I think, a ton of that I'd love to understand. I don't know a ton about Tolkien, but people who have really dived into his history, I'm sure he's taken so much of his lived experience. And even in the preface, he says something like, by the time I was 18, half of my friends or most of my friends were dead. Tolkien saw so much suffering. I'm sure that he kind of exuded a lot of that onto the paper that he was writing, but he certainly captures it incredibly well. And I believe Gandalf has his moment with the Witch King before, and it's right before the dawn breaks, right?
That's right.
He sees the Witch King, which is really scary too, because they do a good job of making them terrifying in the movies. But when the Black Rider, so the Witch King of
Inroad, the
Angmar,
Lord of the Nazgul.
yes, terrifying, cool. And flung back his hood, and behold, he had a kingly crown, and yet upon no head visible was it set, and just it's terrifying. Like it's really spooky. Scary. Yeah.
No, and it just reminded me now. It's like Gandalf the White against the Witch King, Gandalf the Gray versus the Balrog. It's like it's a very similar position because he almost says verbatim. He's like, you cannot, instead of you cannot pass, it's you cannot enter here.
Yeah.
But I like how it happens in the books. In the movies, I don't really enjoy it. Like the staff gets broken, like whatever. I think they need to show that the Witch King is like very powerful.
A real enemy to Gandalf.
Because I think as far as every implication has led us up to this point, Gandalf actually decisively wins that one.
Yeah.
I mean, when they first meet Gandalf in the woods, he's like, I'm the most dangerous, when he's talking to the 3 hunters, he's like, I'm the most dangerous thing you will ever see.
Right.
And so I think it's actually better. You never really see Gandalf fully mask off, so to speak.
Yeah.
But that's the scene, like, again, to just fan over Tolkien, the writing once more of the Nazgul, like when he just walks in alone through after Grond smashes the gate, and it's just like and all fled in terror but one, and then it describes like Shadowfax also, just how he's like resolute and unmoving like a statue they were, and just standing there. Because Gandalf has a lot of epic moments. You kind of hinted at one when he goes out and like the white light comes from him, and again juxtaposed between the darkness, and here's like this like one little ball of light.
Yeah.
Super cool.
This is another cool Gandalf moment. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really cool. It's a lot of like the juxtaposition of the two is great. And like you said, like the staff breaking, I do think it's, to your point, just showing that this is a true foe against Gandalf. He's not totally immortal or impenetrable. This is like a real adversary for him. But I like how it's described in the books. It's just very creepy, and it's these two immovable, like an immovable object meets an unstoppable force.
Yeah, very good point. No, I like that. Yeah. And it's also quite cool how for now, since the 2 towers, the Nazgul have been riding on their fell beasts, but I think it's much cooler actually to come in on the horse, like the Black Rider set against the White Rider. I don't know, like the imagery when you're just like picturing like. It paints such a beautiful, but like you were saying with this description, a horrifying image, like because you never think that the Nazgul are gonna unhood themselves, and you're always like, what would be under them?
And to hear nothing is actually scarier. Like there is something really horrific in nothing. That's kind of an existential conversation that we don't need to go through, but to see that it's nothing, I was like, whoa, that is really scary. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it says the red fires shone between it and the mantled shoulders vast and dark, and from a mouth unseen there came a deadly laughter. It's just haunting, like a really haunting description.
It's so well done. The Nazgul, I love them. I think they're some of the greatest book villains They're
Oh my
always
gosh,
creepy
of all
whenever they're
time.
on the page.
Yeah. And I do like the portrayal in the movies because they are scary and the shrieks that they make, like they are terrifying
Mhm.
in every way. But sometimes just reading it is so much, you can just really get in your head. And I'm
Yeah, well,
definitely
like
an in
you're
your head
saying,
kind of
is
person.
the ability to write about despair is
Yeah.
it's palpable.
Yeah. And then it is that moment. I mean, that's the dawn comes, the cock crows, and in answer, they came from far away another note, horns, horns, horns. Oh my God, it's
Yeah, it's so
almost as
good. The
good
chills.
as
It
the
really
moment
is.
in the movie.
Hmm.
Because the moment in the movie is phenomenal. And then Theoden's speech, I mean, I think there's more, like Rohan had come at last is essentially how that chapter
That's
ends,
right.
which is
Yeah.
just, oh, and then it takes you right back to how did Rohan get here? And they go through the
Hmm.
wild men, which we've already talked about. But then when they are preparing, it's interesting because Theoden's speech is so beautiful in the books, but I'm a sucker for the movies. And
Yeah.
we'll have to talk about this piece again when we come back because in the Battle of Pelennor Fields, half of his speech that you see in the movies is actually said by Aramir. So I don't want to get into that too much, but just to
But
hark.
a good chunk of it is in that initial charge with
No,
the arise around
absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. The fell deeds awake, fire and slaughter. But it's the moment in the movies for me when after it all, Theoden just raises his sword and goes, death. And everyone is just, and Mary and Aemon, they're
You want to be
screaming
there.
death. It's crazy that you want to be there because, of course, you don't want to be there. But just to
Mhm.
feel that they're all like one symbiotic creation that are going on this path together, it's
It might be
epic.
the most powerful scene in the movies, which is really saying a lot. And maybe at any
Yeah.
given day, I could change my mind on that. But there's no other scene, save maybe like the very end for a different reason when Sam and Frodo part. Um, spoilers. It is that it's so the music paired with the screaming, like it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
There's nothing that's touched me like that
It gives
in
me instant
movies.
chills to the point that just us talking about it has chills going through my body. Like
Yeah,
the Rohirrim music, oh my god, it's so beautiful. And yeah, they're all screaming and they know what they're riding to. And what Theoden says beforehand is epic. And you're right. He says, like looking at it now, he says most of it. You know, spear shall be shaken, shield shall be splintered, a sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises. Ride now, ride now, ride to Gondor. But to end it off with death, like Peter Jackson,
oh yeah,
100%.
yeah. I
Great
agreed. No,
call.
no, it's a fantastic war cry because it also just it does a great job at succinctly telling you like there's no hope, and all of these guys think that they're going to death, because I mean they
Most of them
are
are.
in a
Yeah.
sense, yeah. But that passage at the end of that chapter is so riveting and so beautiful. Like the description of Theoden, when they're charging, like it's almost like we joked about this over text, but like aside from the music, it really is. It's as epic as the word could possibly make it.
Yeah.
About him like riding, he's like a king of old or like a god
Yeah.
of old. They mentioned some Valar in like the battle of against
That's right. They
Morgoth.
compare. That's right. I can't remember the
And
name
how
of the
like and like
king,
how
but
like his shield is like unblazoned or blazing now, and like the grass is turning green as he like and no one could overtake him. Theoden, that is.
yes. Yeah. No,
It's
he's just leading the
so
charge and
moving.
it is
Yeah.
beautiful. And the very last, and I feel like I've quoted so much, but it's just, you can't say it better
No,
than the
it's
man
worth it.
himself. But the very end of that chapter, so where we're going to end it is, and then all the host of Rohan burst into song, and they sang as they slew, for the joy of battle was on them, and the sound of their singing that was fair and terrible came even to the city. And it's just like,
It's fantastic.
what? Oh my God.
Yeah.
To make you want to, and for Tolkien, who is so, you know, probably would be disgusted by us being like, oh, we want to be there. Like he's been a very realist and war is hell and terrible. And like, no, you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy, truly. But to see the triumph and the way that this group has come together and accepted their fate and fought for something so much larger than the individual man, and how he's just packaged this up in some of the most beautiful prose I've ever read. It's
Yeah.
it's so
No, it's
moving.
a stat. It's moving. I mean, and that's the thing where like fantasy often, and I think for good reason, gets kind of a bad rap. For anyone that's interested, there's a wonderful essay by Tolkien. It's called On Fairy Stories, and it's essentially his justification as to why people not only should like not be worried about reading fairy tales, how he calls them,
Right.
in their older age, but also how like they should. And there's like, I don't think it's maybe it's cliche, but I don't think it's wrong or cheesy to suggest that there is a lot like packed in here that is very important that I think people could learn a lot from. Like the ideas of pity, like
Yeah.
I'm not gonna pity Sauron's servants, you know, how that plays out, whoever that may be in the real world at any given time. But it's like these are it's moving for a very real reason. Let's just say that.
No,
Um,
absolutely. There's real life, like not lessons, that's not it, but
it's more
interpretations of this
reality.
that, yeah, and you can apply it to life and be a better person for it. And it is that it's
Totally.
that theme of pity, and we talked about it before. Pity is sometimes construed as a negative thing today, like, oh, I feel so bad for you. It's not like
Yeah.
that. It's I'm empathizing. I understand your position. I see it. I, can walk in your shoes essentially. And that goes hand in hand with the hope versus despair. And even in these most despairing moments that are written so well that you despair along with the characters, there's
Mhm.
that reminder of why you need to keep hope alive, and how hope works as a magic in and of itself. And
Totally,
they're just
exactly
really
right.
important themes, not just to a story that we're nerdly obsessed with, but to life, to really
Yeah.
living and existing. And it's beautiful.
No, that's exactly right. So maybe that's a good place to end it here. I still have a few things in my notes, but I think we can carry them over to because we're only getting started. We've probably been going for an hour and a half or so.
Oh yeah, we
More.
always I mean, we can't stop. So it's
Yeah,
definitely another long one. We're trying, but even though we are long-winded about it, it all comes from a place of full passion for sure. And even having said that, there's a million things that we have missed. So if
totally.
there's
Yeah,
anything
yeah.
you want us
Every
to talk
single
about,
time.
or oh my
Yeah,
God,
whenever we
Alex,
finish up, I'm like, oh my God, how did I forget this moment? Or why did we not
yeah,
talk about that? Or like, yeah.
yeah,
So
we could
no
go
doubt
so
that'll
deep
happen here too.
for
But
sure. And I
anyone who
mean,
happens to watch can add their own,
please.
perspectives.
Yeah, if there's something you want us to talk about or something you think we got hopelessly wrong,
I'm sure we did.
always open to hearing about it. Of course, we're wrong most of the time, but it
Yeah.
all comes from a place of love. And it might well be that after we've gone through these and we start to realize how much we've missed, that we revisit some of these themes or elements, or we were even saying in text back and forth, God, should we have just taken this chapter by chapter because it's so dense?
Yeah, so I
um
think it was a good call by you, Katie, by the way, to split this up because we could never have done the full book.
I knew it. I knew we wouldn't do
Um,
it. The second I finished Siege
yeah,
of Gondor, I was like, this, I have so much to say already. And that was before Rohan had even arrived. So it's great to kind of end it on this precipice of we're about to get into Battle of Pelennor Fields. There's still so much to happen before we even get to Sam and Frodo. So yeah, I think it was a good call to
Mhm.
stop it here. But we've got a lot more of Lord of the Rings to talk about. So we'll definitely keep it going. And yeah, look forward to hearing from anyone who has some comments of their own on this, because it's a conversation that is evergreen. Like we could honestly talk about it forever.
Exactly. It's like the old tales. You're always in them.
Oh my God. Okay, don't make me cry with Sam's quote, please, because honestly, I'm close to it with all of that. But that's exactly what it is. I mean, I don't know what tale we're in, Sam wise, but it's really interesting to read it and be able to dive into it. And we do so much of this, but not in the same fluid chronological flow together. Like we've talked about these movies since we were sentient beings
Children. Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, exactly.
So it's
We're the
really nice to be able to
halflings.
do it in this capacity. And yeah, I'm really, really enjoying it. So I hope other people are getting enjoyment out of it. But at the very least, it's always great to nerd out in this stuff with you. And I really can't wait for the
Agreed.
next one.
No, no, totally. Looking forward to it.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for anyone tuning in, and we'll kick off our next good takes next time with the Battle of Pelennor Fields, and we'll finish off
Ooh.
book 5, first half of Return of the King.
Death.
Death. Epic. All right. Well, that's it. See y'all later.